All right, thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going through what's new in vRealize Operations Cloud as well as vRealize Log Insight Cloud. So we're going to talk about quite a few things here. First, about vRealize Operations. So here's the kind of the bigger things. We'll double click into each of these as well as go through some other things as well. But I wanted to touch on a few of these first. So there's been, if we're talking about our control plane here, we're making some easy onboarding for our VCF folks, as well as a VMC on Dell or Dell EMC Cloud, making capacity or our capacity analytics aware of the business hours that we have set. And we can also use our what-if scenarios and the ability to commit these scenarios and look at our capacity planning from that once we've already committed, as well as now we can use allocation mode here. So whether we're looking at allocation or demand model, we can use those what-if scenarios. As far as public cloud is concerned, we now have the ability to run our basic actions on our public clouds. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We've also increased our coverage for services and relationships within those public clouds. And we're also getting a little closer to our source data there, or ingestion, with cloud proxies, or that we can deploy cloud proxies directly into those public clouds for AWS and Azure. We're talking about applications. Very excited about synthetic monitoring for our business applications. So we'll take a look at that and how that works. We also have the ability to monitor apps in our public clouds, that's AWS and Azure as well, with our open source Telegraph agent. So we'll discuss that in detail as well. And the new summary pages for our business applications that come along or go along hand in hand then with our synthetic monitoring. With our experience or kind of how we're looking at all of our data in vRealize Operations, we now have rule-based application discovery, and I know we'll talk about that, as well as redefining things for our supermetrics, redefining those flows, make it a little faster, a little easier to make our supermetrics. And another thing for cloud proxies is some data persistence that we're going to talk about. So if we have any sort of gaps during any sort of connection outage, we're still going to continue collecting all of that data. So I'm going to turn it over to Yogita first here. She can go and talk about some things for Automation Central. So Yogita, I'll let you go ahead and share first.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can folks see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So to begin with, we have some UX improvements in automation. We have the ability now for monthly schedules and for 5-minute interval between your jobs that are scheduled. You can schedule these jobs on specific days or specific days of the month, on first and last day of the month. You can, there's a lot of UX improvements around this. So once I cover a couple more topics around the UX improvement, I'll show you in the product itself how it looks like. But this is a vast improvement over what it was before and way easy to use now. The next UX improvement is in supermetrics. So if you were like me, where you've created a lot of supermetrics, either for yourself, for your end users, or for your management to be used in reports and views, you will really appreciate this new and improved supermetric UI, where it's got a really easy to use workflow, intuitive sequence of actions, faster validation, gives you a quick look into what went wrong. You can have an option between formatted and unformatted and select your units right within the same UI without having to jump around like we had before. And having used the screen real estate better, it makes it much easier for you to see what you're doing, whereas before it was very hard to get into the UI and figure out what the heck am I doing, to see the preview. With this new and improved supermetric, once your supermetric is created, or if somebody else has created the supermetric for you, you can quickly click on it and see the details of what your supermetric looks like, what the formula is, what policies it is enabled on, and so on and so forth. So let me show you a quick demo. Okay, so the first UX improvement was within the automation center. When you add a job and you create a job, say to delete old snapshots that are, if you have a policy to delete them older than 60 days, you can configure that. You can go in and select your scope as to where you want to run this job. So in my case, I will select, let's see, which one do we want? Let me select this particular data center. That's the scope for this job to run. And in the schedule, you can select monthly, which is the biggest change in the UI here. The start times for the job are also now only 5 minutes apart, where they used to be 15 minutes apart. You can select, deselect all months, or you can say all months, but on the last day of the month, or you can, if you don't want to pick a specific date, you can say, give me the first and the last Sunday, run my job. You can select an end date if you have one, or if you have no end date, you can choose that option. Or you can say, stop doing this job after, say, 5 occurrences of this job. In addition to that, you can also, receive notifications via email and enter your recipient's email address. So this is the first UX improvement. The next one I'm going to show you is the supermetric that we just saw. So I won't save this. So let's create a brand new supermetric and perhaps call it CPU contention. And the next thing you do is you select your object type. Now with this new UI, if you are a person who heavily uses the mouse, you can do it all with the mouse without any keyboard typing at all. Or if you prefer, you can use the keyboard and type in here and short list your object types. The next is the actual formula. It's a little blank, but it gives a little hint. However, the very first click in here gives you an idea of what you need to select next. So if you select a function, say max, the next thing you do is select the object type. And again, I'm only using the mouse, but you can, if you are used to typing your formulas in, you can do that as well. So virtual machine, metric type. And let's see. Where is my CPU contention? Okay. Right there. Okay, now I have a formula. What do I do with it next? I have validate and preview options right here. So let me click the validate button. Okay, good. My expression is valid. Gives me a quick feedback as to whether my supermetric is going to work. I can also do a quick preview, and it auto selects one host in here to give you an idea of whether your formula is going to work or not. If this is not the host of interest to you, you can select, you can click here and it will show you only host because you've already selected your context in here. You can select multiple hosts and have them played on top of each other, or you can say you want to split your charts and see them individually. This one's not of interest to you anymore. You can remove that. Or you can also select the time period for which you want to see this within the preview itself. Now, if you are somebody who does not like this formatted view, but prefers the unformatted view, you can also quickly select this toggle button here and see the unformatted view for your supermetric. In addition to that, the choice of unit is also available right here, and you can select whatever unit it is that your supermetric is about. The next button will take you to the policies, and you can quickly enable the super metric in your default policy or multiple policies as you so fit. So once you create this super metric, so this is the super metric. You can click on the name of the super metric, and it shows you a quick look at what object types the super metric is assigned to, what formula is for the super metric, and what policy is it enabled in. So you can see this for your older existing super metrics as well. So I, for one, am very excited about the super metric UI. That is really, really good. It was very painful with the old UI that we had. All right, so moving on to capacity, and I will hand this over to Brandon.
All right, share my screen. A couple more usability things just wanted to mention. So we have the improved UI for the outbound settings. So when you go and define your outbound settings, you can, it's a little bit simpler, a little easier to use. So yeah, not a whole lot to say on that one. The views UI though, that one has been overhauled quite a bit. It's now kind of wizard based, where you can kind of flow through the process of creating a view. If you've done one before, it should feel probably familiar. But the idea is you can run through and go through the various stages. So it should feel more consistent with the new UI that we're doing. And you get the ability to like preview it as you're adding in and changing things on your view. So pretty cool. Definitely check out the new view UI. Views now also have the ability to be shared. So you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, you have a little share icon. You can click on that and gives you the ability to share the view itself. So this is the data that's in the view, similar to like what you do when you're sharing a dashboard. You end up getting a URL, and you can use that URL in other systems like Power BI is a popular one. But basically, it gives you the ability to look at the data from a view and see that to see that through the API call. So definitely cool, especially if you have users using Power BI or other reporting tools. They can come in and add this views, get the URL and add it into their external reporting system. Okay, so now I'll switch over and talk about capacity. A lot of great stuff from capacity perspective in this release. So yeah, let me get into it and kind of talk about all the new stuff here. So first up is support for allocation model and what if scenarios. So now when if you have allocation model enabled on a cluster, you go through and create your what if scenario. Your results will now show both demand model and allocation model. Basically, based on whether you have allocation model enabled or not. So really great improvement, especially for for people that are using the allocation model on clusters. Also for what if scenarios, we have commit. So this was a big ask. So we actually now have the ability to, when you create a what if scenario, you want to actually commit that scenario, and basically you want to plan for that scenario, and whatever change is going to be done in that scenario, you want to be able to plan for that in the future. So we have support for adding VMs, removing VMs, adding hosts, removing hosts, so you can commit all 4 of those scenarios. You do get the ability to also track the scenarios over time. So like when you create a what if scenario, you basically, so like say, for example, I'm creating an add VM scenario. I go in there and I can specify a start date and I can specify an end date. So the start date is basically when my virtual machines will be added in an add VM scenario. And the end date is optional, but you would specify that if the VMs are temporary. So if you're doing an add VM scenario, start date is when you add the VMs, end date is when you remove the VMs. So if you're not going to remove the VMs, these are going to be permanent VMs that are going to live on for potentially years. You would want to not specify an end date. So just make sure you keep track of that. And then there's also ability to, when you have these committed scenarios, to be able to mark the various stages as complete. So if you have both a start and end date, you can mark the 2 stages of the what if scenario as complete. I'll show this in a demo. I think it'll make a little more sense in the demo as well. So what you see here for the what if scenarios when you actually have a committed project You can see things like you see here on the chart where the date where my VMs are added, the dates where the VMs were removed because I specified an end date. That's the purple line in the projection there. And then I also have the line where I added a host. So you can see both, both add hosts and add VMs. You can kind of see how they all interplay together. And again, I'll show this in the demo, so hopefully it'll make a little more sense. The next thing we'll talk about from capacity perspective is awareness for business hours. So this now allows us to specify what the business hours are for the workload so that you can define this. It's basically at the policy level. So you can see here in my screenshot, I'm basically doing 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. And then the way you see that in the projections is we now have the additional colors on the historical data. So you can see the gray is non-business hours and the purple is business hours. So when you actually look in the chart, you can see the difference between those. So you can still see what the utilization was during non-business hours, but you can, the system, when it creates these projections, it actually uses the business hours workloads for those projections. So this helps you do things like exclude non-business workloads. So this is like backups that happen at night. You have your monthly patching, you got your AV scans, things like that happen during non-business hours. They're non-business workload. So you can kind of exclude those from these projections. So I know this is a big ask. This has been something that customers have been asking for a lot. So hopefully you'll like this. So this, like I said, this applies to both, you can look at it from a cluster perspective, also for VMs. So if you want to look at it for right sizing, so if you have virtual machines that have business hour workloads, you can look at that for right sizing as well. And then, just pay attention. There's a little tooltip icon there that actually shows you what the business hours are configured on that particular object. So if you're not sure, if you're in a different time zone, you can look at that and get an idea of what the business hours are for that environment. Okay, so the last slide I want to show here is custom profiles. So like I was talking about before with the improved UI, we actually have done a similar improvement to the custom profile definitions. So you can go through and define your custom profiles. And it's just is an updated UI. So this is just a refresher. This is what's used to calculate VMs remaining for a cluster. So you can say basically how many VMs will fit in a cluster based on the profile that you define. And one thing that I hear that causes some issues sometimes is when you enter allocation model numbers only, and you don't have allocation model enabled on your cluster, you could end up not having any numbers on there. So just be cognizant of that when you're dealing with the profiles. If you have allocation model enabled, you can enter allocation numbers on the profile. It's fine. But if you don't have allocation model enabled on your cluster, you have to enter the utilization numbers in your profile. The allocation numbers won't actually do anything. So I know it's a little counterintuitive, but hopefully that makes sense. Just realize, allocation numbers in your profile means allocation model needs to be enabled on the cluster. So just don't let that trip you up. Okay, so let me switch over and do a quick demo. Okay. So I'm going to go in here to do what if planning, for capacity. So you can see now we have 2 sections here. So what if analysis and committed scenarios. I'm gonna start here in what if analysis and show you what this looks like. So I'm going to add some virtual machines and just pick a cluster. And then I can either enter my profile or I can do from existing virtual machines, either way. But just for this, I'm going to enter some numbers here just to show you what this looks like. And here's my start date and end date. So just remember the end date is if it's temporary. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And now this looks the same as what we had before, but the important part here is you see now we have a commit button. So I can hit commit and I can go in here and I can give it a name, and give it a start and end date and basically save that committed scenario. The other way of looking at it here is under committed scenarios. So here I have 2 scenarios that I've pre-created. So I've got one that's adding virtual machines and one that's adding a host of a cluster. So here you can basically just see basically what's been entered on the scenario. And what I want to do is click on the cluster here, and this will take me to the cluster itself. And this will allow me to, there we go. Okay, so this now allows me to see the capacity of the cluster itself. So what I'm looking at here is my projection on the right. So the blue part is my actual projection, and then the purple part is with the additional workload. So this is the additional workload for my committed scenario. And remember I said I had an end date on there. So that's where you'll see that this actually goes down. That's my end date. So I added virtual machines, and then at the end date hits, my VMs are removed. So hopefully that makes sense. And if I don't want that to happen, I just don't enter an end date. And that's what you can see here on the add host. I didn't enter an end date, so you see it just goes on forever. So that's where additional capacity is added, and it never goes away. Hopefully that makes sense from there. And then the other thing is, go back to my scenario. I can go in here and do a complete. And like I was saying, there's two stages to it. So I can say I've gone through and added my VMs in my what if scenario. And then I can go back over into my chart and refresh it. And you'll see that the projection gets updated. There you go. So see, now I no longer have that add VMs in here, but my remove VM part is still happening. And then I go back in here and say complete. And now I want to complete the remove VMs. And I go back to my chart. And you'll see now the impact of that commit or the add VMs is gone. So the purple part is no longer there because I no longer have any add or remove VM scenarios in my on this particular cluster. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's just important to make sure you understand the start date and end date and do the actual completion to mark when the various stages are done. Okay, so that's for the what if scenarios. Now let me talk a little bit about the business hours piece. So I'm just going to go in here and show on my capacity settings, I have my business hours set up. So you see here, I've got it set up Eastern time, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You can enter this, whatever makes sense for your environment. And then the part I wanted to kind of highlight here is if I just zoom in, you'll notice the two different colors. So the gray is the non-business hours and the blue is the business hours workloads. So, the purple is the business hours workloads. So hopefully that makes sense. You can kind of see the difference there. And one thing to point out is, the system, when it actually comes up with these projections, it's looking at basically the workload that happened during business hours, and then that non-business hours workload. It's actually filling that in with an average of the demand for the previous business hour window. So let's say for example, tonight at 5 p.m. when I go into non-business hours, it'll use the average demand for today, so 8 to 5 today, and it fills that in for that non-business hours window tonight. Hopefully that makes sense, and it kind of helps you fill in the gaps in those projections. So it basically ends up ignoring whatever happens during that non-business hours. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That's all I really wanted to demo right now. Oh yeah, sorry, I have one more slide I wanted to mention. So I just wanted to reiterate here. Again, the end date, just be very cognizant of the end date, start date, end date, and do the completion like I was talking about, complete the committed scenario as you go through. And then like I was saying with the business hours, the non-business hours is filled in with the average of the previous business hour window. So, that's how it actually ends up filling in those non-business hour gaps. And then the VMs remaining for the custom profiles, just make sure if you have a cluster that only has allocation model, a profile that only has allocation model, the cluster must have allocation model enabled for it to work. So just a couple of tips there, hopefully help you out when you are doing your capacity planning. Okay, now I'm actually done.
All right, so the next section that we're going to talk about here is going to be content and management packs. So that would be anything we're talking about, new metrics, new properties, any changes with any of the management packs we have out there. So there have been a couple new metrics that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention here. The first one is IOPS per gigabyte. So this is designed then to help us identify those disks that are close to exceeding performance based on the tiers. So we can show VMDKs that exceed that threshold, making it easier to move those VMDKs to faster storage tiers, or the reverse. Any VMDKs that have low IOPS, we can move those then to any sort of slower tiers. We also have a peak network packet per second within the collection cycle, so we're grabbing that peak metrics there. So that could be helpful if we have any sort of limit that is set on packets per second, something like that. And the last one is the guest peak OS, the page out rate. So it's going to collect, again, the peak of whatever we have for that guest OS, the page out rate by that guest OS. Now, as far as new properties, there are quite a few that have been added here. We'll kind of go through them fairly quickly here, since there are quite a few. These are properties, not metrics in this case. So quite a few on VMs. So things with network or the port group that the virtual NIC belongs to. Some description of VM that we see in the vCenter client. Some things on configuration, the virtual disk on the encryption status. So whether that's a 1 or a 0, 1 means it be encrypted. Our IOPS limit, so our upper limit of our disk IOPS per second, as well as the data store cluster. So that's the cluster the VM resides on, and then the IO status of our VM or direct path IO status that we can enable access to our PCI functions and platforms. For ESXi, so all of our host properties, we have the BIOS release date. So that's when the actual version of the BIOS, not the date. I want to put a note here. This is not the date that the BIOS was installed, but the actual release date of that version. And then two things on speed and for our networking here, our physical adapters, the speed and the actual speed, right? So that's the speed is going to be our configured, or what is configured on the network card, and then the actual speed is a separate property. So that could be potentially lower than the speed or the configured capacity due to any sort of auto negotiation going on there. On the cluster, we just have the remediation mode that's taken for the cluster, as well as the folder, the parent data center, the parent vCenter, and I wanted to call out these will be used there on the object summary page. So if you're looking at a particular folder, those will be on that summary page for that object. For the data store and data store cluster, for the data store, we have the storage IO control that's either enabled or disabled. So enabled means control over the disk IO is in place, or disabled, obviously the opposite. We have the cluster letting us know there's new property for the total number of data stores in that cluster, again, as well as the parent vCenter and parent data center. And lastly, on the properties here, for the distributed port groups, we have the port bindings, so how those are assigned to the virtual machines, as well as the allocation, whether that's elastic or fixed allocation on the ports. And for the distributed switch, same thing with the storage IO control. In this case, we're talking network IO control, enabled or disabled. Brandon, I'll let you go ahead and talk about some other new things here as far as the KPIs for VM availability.
Yeah, so we have a new metric. This is for VM availability. So this is kind of looking at an aggregation of multiple perspectives to determine if a VM is available or not. So this is basically combines the heartbeat coming from VM tool, or the uptime coming from VM tools. Heartbeat, this is basically from vSphere looking at the virtual machine itself, whether it's up and running. Then it's looking at disk writes, network transmits, and stuff like that. So basically, it's aggregating that all together to trying to determine if a VM is up or not. So this will work regardless of whether VM tools is installed or not. So hopefully that helps. And it's available as a metric on each virtual machine. Go to the next one. So this one, I know is a big one. So this is actually bringing in vSAN storage policy awareness. So we now have the ability to see a lot of different metrics or properties related to the storage policy for VM decays. So this is per VM decay on a virtual machine. So some of these are enabled by default, like failures to tolerate, the replica performance, storage policy, name, and the site disaster tolerance. Those are all enabled by default, but there's additional metrics there or properties there that you can enable in the policy. So really great. I know this is something that's been asked for a lot. It's pretty exciting to see that. So if you go to the next slide, there's also a couple other metrics related to vSAN storage policy overhead. So when you're looking at a virtual machine and you're looking at the virtual machine used metric, that's showing the total amount of disk space used, including the vSAN overhead. So now what we've added these two new metrics, we're actually splitting that disk space utilization into basically virtual machine used with overhead or without overhead, and then vSAN overhead. So you can actually see, if the virtual machine was not using vSAN, how much disk space would it actually use? So yeah, these are another ones that have been asked for quite a bit. So definitely check those out. Those are under disk space for the virtual machine. So this is basically at the virtual machine level. But it gives you a great way of tracking the overhead for vSAN, and then the impact of what the vSAN storage policy has on the disk space used by the VM. Okay, and the next one is support for IPv6 for NSXT. So there's not a whole lot to really show on this one, but if you have IPv6 for the NSXT manager, you can use that now and connect to it through IPv6. So when you enter the name of your IP of your NSX manager, you can use the IP4 address, IP6 address, or the FQDN. So any of them works. And like I said, FQDN, it can use the IPv6 address. So I think that was all for me. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Brandon. So yeah, let's go into public cloud enhancements here. That's just to announce this is not going to go through the public or the cloud proxies at the moment. This is just the sort of native public cloud enhancements. We'll get into those cloud proxy enhancements as we go through. So this is just the public cloud. So first, let's talk about AWS. We have enhanced the coverage then for our storage, our analytics, our database and network. I've added a new service as well as updated some of the object relationships for some of the previous services where we were collecting metrics for some of the services, but didn't really have all of the object relationships. So you can see those at the bottom. We've also changed the dashboards around a little bit, or specifically the AWS inventory and AWS EC2 dashboards. So those will look a little bit different. So we have and I'll jump into this here a little bit more. We'll show a demo here real quick, just so we can look at that. But it makes it a lot easier to look at our inventory, as well as those EC2, those compute EC2 instances are a lot easier to kind of look through as we get a dashboard there. Again, just a note, we have the CloudWatch agent should be installed if we're getting those memory metrics. For Azure, we have nearly full coverage at this point. We have moved up to 74 out of the 76 metrics, or I'm sorry, services that we can grab, as well as, again, enhance those object relationships and the custom summary pages for each of those objects. We've changed those dashboards around here, the same inventory in the Azure VM dashboard instead of EC2 like on AWS. So we've made those a little easier to view. When it comes to GCP, we're up to a total of 19 out of 55 services, so we're working towards that as well. In this release, we have 5 new services that have been added with relationships. So again, that brings it up to 19 out of 55. Work still continuing there. Also refreshed our content for GCP when it comes to our GCP, our Google inventory, as well as our CE instances or our compute engine instances as well. And we'll look at those a little bit when we go forward. And lastly, for the slides, we have the ability now then to be able to either power off our VMs if they're already powered on, power them on if they're already off, or reboot those instances. So something that's a little bit of a precursor here for adding these into Automation Central, something we will probably be looking at in a future release, but this is what we needed to to get started with. We can either do this on a single EC2 Azure VM or CE, or we can do them multiple instances if we are using the inventory as well. So I want to jump in. Let's just kind of look at these a little bit here and see what these newer dashboards look like. So jumping into AWS inventory, we can see then we've got our AWS world, our overall world there, how many accounts, our accounts in the regions. And then again, since this is an inventory, we've just got everything listed out that we're running there. It's the same if we're looking at, say, Azure, and we've got our Microsoft Azure inventory as well. Of course, instead of looking at accounts, we're looking at subscriptions and resource groups here, but very similar when it comes to that, everything listed out for us. If we switch over and look at, again, those the compute dashboards, if we bring up the dashboard for EC2 here, we again get our accounts or the world, and we can see all of our instances by size. So right from our T2 micros all the way up to our T3 larges that we've got in this environment, and the kind of breakdown as we go through. You can also look at, since we're talking here on AWS, we've got our CPU and our memory, so our highest or lowest, our distribution there for CPU and memory, as well as our network. So we can see our network in, or our network out, I'm sorry, as well as our distribution. It goes down, goes through our power states, and then we can pick individually, if we'd like to, individual instances and see our key metrics that go along with that. And it's the same if we, or similar anyway, if we go to our Azure virtual machine, we get the same kind of sizing. We get our CPU metrics. We don't have memory metrics directly from Azure, Microsoft Azure, so we just have the CPU in this case. But same thing, we can also then pick our virtual machines from our list if we want to look at specific virtual machines. And lastly, if I'm just going to jump back here, if we go to our, let's just pick one of our EC2 instances here and go directly to our summary page. I just wanted to show, instead of just having our actions, we had our launch in context to vRealize Network Insight, but now we also then have under this actions here at the top, again, we can power off our instance, reboot our instance. If this instance was already powered off, we can obviously then power it on instead. All right, I think that is it for me in this section. Let's move on to the next section.
All right, so we have some cool new features around applications. The very first one is rule-based application search and discovery. To begin with, they have cleaned up the UI quite a bit. So under configure, all your application, it used to be application discovery, monitoring, and separate menu options, but now it's all under applications and services. Very clean and neat with a new option here to have rule-based application discovery. You can create, with a simple rule, you can discover all your applications. You can choose the scope of your application discovery as well. The way to do it would be under applications and services. You create a brand new rule. You can select the object type on which you want to run this rule. For selecting the rule, you have the option of choosing tag categories, object name, or properties. And based on what your rule definition is, it will then go in and select your applications. However, once you create the rule, you also have to enable it on your application. You can select the scope from this list here to decide where you wanted to apply this rule, and it will go in and apply this rule to that scope and discover your applications in there. Once your applications are discovered, you can go in and select that, go to the details right from within manage applications in the UI. Very easy, very intuitive to follow. And notice that this picture shows you that this particular rule has 3 applications selected. So in addition to this, you can also import and export your application definitions through content management export UI. So you can actually export these rules and import in other vRops instances. Once you have these business applications selected, the next big thing is to be able to enable synthetic monitoring. Again, a very much asked for feature for your business applications. If you have synthetic monitoring enabled, you can do it right from within your business application summary page here, or your improved business application summary page also shows you the different applications that were discovered, not only in terms of the different components of your application, but you can also switch to the infrastructure tab to see where these applications are laid out in your infrastructure. So this is our new and improved summary page for your business applications, where you can switch between your application topology and your infrastructure details for your application. Like I mentioned before, if you have synthetic monitoring enabled for your business application, you can see the availability on the business application page itself. So that's a good segue into the synthetic monitoring for your applications. So what is this feature exactly? Synthetic monitoring is basically your ability to monitor your API calls for your public-facing applications. You can chain up to 10 checks for each business applications to check for your common user workflows. Up to 20 business applications can be monitored. You have to configure your business application APIs. Once you configure them, you have to enable that enable synthetic monitoring on that applications. What enabling synthetic monitoring does is basically ask the backend engine to run these APIs based on the configurations that you have set up. And like I mentioned before, you can do this from the business application UI, where you can configure synthetic monitoring, or you can do it from the summary page itself. Once you have synthetic monitoring enabled on your business applications, you have the option to even troubleshoot with the workbench. You can go to the details, or you can disable synthetic monitoring for certain applications if you do not, if you're in the middle of updating your application, or for whatever reason you need to disable it for some time. So this is what the synthetic monitoring UI looks like. So you create a new rule and you give it a name. So that name could be, maybe you're interested in monitoring the API of your login page or your home page. You select the API request of interest to you, which could be a post or a get method, and you give the exact URL. Then, just like you would do in an HTTP client, you set up the custom headers, body parameters, and authentication for your API call. You can test that API right there itself with the test button and validate your functionality. For authentication, it supports basic auth, pair token, and OAuth to be able to test your API calls. Now, you can, like I mentioned before, you can select up to 10 API calls to monitor for your business applications. These 10 API calls could be your user workflow that maybe you are interested in monitoring. And for every 200 status returned is what is the KPI that gets shown in the summary page on the business application summary page. Okay, so once you have synthetic monitoring enabled on a business application, you see a new tab here, which says synthetic monitoring, and you get to the details of that. Okay. This page here shows you, so for example, this is a picture of a business application where we are monitoring the main page, the shopping cart, and the iPhone product page, the 3 URLs that are being monitored. So this response time for the time range that you have selected shows you a chart for what response times were received for those API calls. If you need to look at details of each API call, you can expand it right in the summary page here. And you can also see DNS lookup, TLS handshake, TCP connections, and more details about the API call that was made along with the response time. Okay. In addition to that, you can also configure alerts for synthetic monitoring. So each API call will represent its own set of metrics. And you can choose to either use the health alert that comes out of the box, or you can choose to create a custom alert based on the status code that was returned from your API request. Like I mentioned before, the rules that you created for your business applications and your application definitions can now be exported and imported with your content management under your administrative privileges is something that you would need to do content management, of course. And there you can go in and select the rule-based applications and the rules and services that you would like to export with your content. So moving on to the demo. So under configure, under applications and services, you now have a new tile here for rule-based application discovery. You can go in and here, and I have created a new rule where I can show you what it says. So I have used the tag category app type for a virtual machine app object, and you can click your preview application list. You can select the source as to which vCenter do I want to apply, or which data center do I want to apply my rule to. Let me apply to my Santa Clara vCenter, which is where I have applied. So in vSphere, I can show you. So these are my VMs where I have created a new tag category app type and assigned a tag to the different tiers of my application, be it the app tier, the database tier, or the web tier. And that is what was discovered by my tag category app type rule here. Okay. Once you save your rule here, you can go to manage applications from within here for your discovered applications. And you can select the scope for your rule. And here you would see the different applications that were discovered. Here also you see it discovered 3 applications. I had added the tag to 3 different tiers in my vCenter server. Okay. If you are looking to do, you can even go to the details right from here into the object browser, and you can choose to troubleshoot your application with the troubleshooting workbench, or if you choose to look at other details regarding your applications, you can do it from the summary page here as well. The next thing I wanted to show you was the synthetic monitoring. So if you go to So under business applications, we have a long list of applications here. You may have 1 or 2, or perhaps a long list like us. For applications, you can go in and edit synthetic monitoring or create a brand new one, right? At the moment, I have already created one API where I've called it my login API. I've chosen the get method and given it a URL. If you choose to monitor your user workflow with multiple APIs, you can just simply add a new API and say, well, go to the shopping cart and shopping cart UI, and then maybe it's a get call, and you want to choose my cart.url. You can choose the headers here, or in the advanced settings, you can even choose your timeout and retry options for your API call. You can choose the body of your API call, parameters, and your authentication. Like I mentioned, you have basic auth, bearer token, and OAuth as your options available. You can test. Now, this is a false URL, so this will not test correctly, and will return in on 200 as my status code. But this is how you go in and set up your synthetic monitoring APIs for your applications. Let's not save this. So let's look at one where synthetic monitoring is enabled. For some reason, if you choose, you can disable synthetic monitoring right from within your business applications UI. Or if you want to troubleshoot your business application with the troubleshooting workbench, you can do that from here as well. So if you go to the details in the object browser for an application where synthetic monitoring is enabled, like I mentioned, you get this new synthetic monitoring tab here. But before we get to that, let's look at this summary page where your business application is shown in great detail as to how all the pieces in your application are connected. If you want to look at a different view, infrastructure view, you can see that as well, how your VMs are laid out in your infrastructure. This business application KPI here represents the total availability of API calls that are averaged month to date. It only returns the availability of status code 200. If you've got a status code other than 200, then your availability will be reduced below your 100%. You can also get to alerts on your business application right from your summary page, if there are any. Once you go to the synthetic monitoring page, it gives you a great level of detail as to what all is enabled in terms of the API calls for your business application. This shows you the response time for the 3 API calls that are enabled for this particular business applications. You can expand these API calls right here and get even more detail as to what that API call looked like. You can get DNS lookup, TCP connection, handshake, other details as well, right from within this page. Okay. Am I missing anything? Okay, no, I think that's it. All right, so the next section I want to talk about is some improvements around cloud proxies. These are small yet significant features in terms of improvement for cloud proxy deployment and configurations. So the very first is the diagnostic tool for cloud proxy. The reason for this is that we found that there is a lot of issues coming in regarding cloud proxies that were mostly related to misconfiguration or some gaps. So this diagnostic tool is a CP, so Cloud Proxy Remote Collectors, what CPRC CLI, and with the -D switch is your diagnostic switch. You can check for connections, network services, and any installation issues that you may have in your cloud proxy. So if you run it with your -D option, this is what the command line output looks like. Here, as you can see, it shows you there's a service that is inactive. In addition to that, this detail also gives you a doc link of how to fix this issue that you are seeing, and also shows you a log location as to problem have been saved. The next is enhanced certificate management for cloud proxy. Here we have the ability now to add multiple certificates while you're doing the deployment. You can add multiple VApp option properties to avoid. Earlier, for each edition of a property, you had to shut down the VApp and restart it. Now you can do that in one go. So also, the imported certificates are now kept in a trust store and not on a file on disk. So that greatly improves the security of your certificates as well. So this is what the UI looks like. So when deploying the cloud proxy, you have the option to give a certificate group here. And when in vCenter, you can add in the configure section, you can go in and add a new property where you can add a certificate class ID to this certificate. If you need to troubleshoot this, you can again use the CPRC CLI with the -CS command, which is the certificate status for CS, and it shows you the certificates that are installed in your cloud proxy. So whether you have an invalid cert or if you have a valid cert, then it gives you details about what those valid cert is all about. So the next improvement in cloud proxies is data persistence. So at the moment, when cloud proxies were down, metrics were not being collected. So you could end up with missing alert trigger events, or you could end up with data gaps. Some existing alert statuses were not cleared. But with this new improvement, with data persistence, you will not see data gaps in the metrics that were collected, including supermetrics. And however, you may have some outdated notifications that come in because of old data coming in once the cloud proxy is back on, or you could also end up with some automated actions that you might have set up that could be a little outdated because it brought in data at a later point. So under data sources and cloud proxies, you can select a cloud proxy and you can choose to disable data persistence if you do not want this option enabled on your cloud proxy as well. And the last but not the least with cloud proxies is your sequential upgrade. So earlier, we couldn't do simultaneous upgrades, and there was a high requirement for network bandwidth, and there was also a collection downtime, like I mentioned. But with this new release, we can upgrade up to 10 proxies at a time. And if there are less than 10 proxies in an environment, they should all start concurrently. If the upgrade of a cloud proxy is successful, or if it fails with a timer of 45 minutes, then the next in the list will be picked up and upgraded automatically for you.
Awesome. Okay, so continuing on, I'll just talk about the ability to use cloud proxies in native public cloud. So we actually have the ability now to use cloud proxies both in AWS and Azure. Gives you the ability to monitor your applications running in EC2 or Azure VMs. So basically what that looks like is here. I'll do a demo, but when you are on the cloud proxy page, you have the ability to select the target cloud. So now you have the option between VMware Cloud, AWS, or Azure. And there's some important steps. I'll kind of talk through it in the demo instead of talking about it on the slide. So basically what this gets you is the ability to see your applications running in your native public cloud instances. So you can see in the screenshot here, we've got our Linux OS and Apache instance running on an EC2 instance. This is coming in through the open source Telegraph agent. So it's actually the Telegraph agent sending the metrics to the cloud proxy. And then that gives us the ability to use basically any of the Telegraph plugins to monitor any applications running in our, our native public cloud environment. So this basically what this gives you, it basically allows you to do the open source Telegraph for your native public cloud workloads. So I think it would make a little more sense if I do it in a demo. So let me switch over. So I'm here on the cloud proxies page. So you can see when I go and add a cloud proxy, here's my dropdown. So I can do AWS. And I've got the steps here that kind of walk you through the process. So if you click here, this takes you to a KB article with a bit more instructions on how to actually deploy it in AWS. So I'll show you a little bit here, just so to make it a little bit easier for you when you want to set it up in your environment. So to make things easier, I've actually created my own IAM role. I just call it VROPS Cloud Proxy, and this is in AWS. So I've given it these two permissions, and this is what I'll use to assign to my cloud proxy. So when I go and actually want to launch a new EC2 instance, you can search here for vRealize Operations, and you'll see there should be one that comes up in the marketplace. So you can see here's the cloud proxy. So this is the one I want to select. There we go. So now it's automatically going to use my cloud proxy image. I can select my instance size, and if I refer back to the KB article, here's the two recommended sizes for my my cloud proxies. So if a standard cloud proxy use T3 large, or a small cloud proxy T3 large, and standard cloud proxy T3 to X large. But I basically want to go through and enter all of the the stuff in here for your instance. I want to, where is my advanced stuff? Sorry. So that's the important part here is the configuration, this advanced details. I'm going to turn on data persistence just to show off the capability. So this will update my my advanced settings down here. So now I'm just going to copy this and go back over to my launch my instance, and down here on the bottom, this is where you would put this data. So when it actually gets deployed, it'll run this code to actually set up the instance for you. And I also mentioned the IAM role here, so we can use my IAM role that I set up to give it the necessary permissions. So now this will basically go and deploy my virtual machine. It'll have the right IAM role, do the right post-deployment configuration. And once that's done, it'll actually show up in my list of cloud proxies. I don't have time to go through the whole thing right now, but a couple of things to note. If you want to access the cloud proxy, by default, SSH is disabled. So you actually have to connect in through Session Manager. So that's what the IAM role was actually allowing you to use Session Manager. So I can go in here and hit connect. And now this will let me connect into the console of my cloud proxy. And I can go in and manage the VM, do the configuration and such in here. So that's something important to know, because there's some configuration you have to do. I'll talk about that in a moment. So just switch over now and show Azure. It's very similar. It shows you where to go. There's a KB article, and let me grab my config down here. So here's the KB article. Definitely encourage you to read that one. And you notice again, here's my instance size that I should use. So when I go in here, the important part is to go in and select my vRealize Operations cloud proxy. So I search for vRealize Operations, and there's my cloud proxy. So now it's going to use my cloud proxy, and I just make sure I set my instance size appropriately. And then on the last page here under advanced, here the custom data is where my script goes from the cloud proxy's UI. So continue on and actually do the deployment, and now this would actually end up getting the cloud proxy deployed, and it'll show up in our cloud proxies in vRealize Operations Cloud. And the last thing is similar, like what I showed for on AWS, to get into the console using Session Manager. In Azure, you can connect in here to the serial console, and this is how you can get onto the cloud proxy and make any configuration changes that you need to do on the cloud proxy. And like I said, after you actually go through and do this, you'll see here in my list of cloud proxies, if I sort it, you'll see here's my cloud proxy from Azure. It's got my cloud type, or target type here, and then AWS showing up here. So, once you go through all that, you'll be able to get your cloud proxy set up. And then once you do that, you want to go and actually configure it to use the open source Telegraph agents. And in order to do that, you have to follow this document here. So you have to edit the HTTP South httpd.conf file and just uncomment these sections and restart Apache. That will make it where it can accept metrics from the open source Telegraph agent. And then what that ends up looking like is something here I can show on a dashboard I've got created. So this particular dashboard is showing some MOAD shopping cart applications that we have deployed across all the different clouds. So I'm going to show you the AWS one here. So if I zoom in, actually do it this way. So I zoom in here, you can see I've got my EC2 instance for my web server. Here's my Linux OS. And then go into my Azure, and then I can see the same thing. Can zoom in. Here's my web server, my Linux OS, and such. So, like I said, this is all coming from the open source Telegraph agent, sending into vRealize Operations through that cloud proxy. So hopefully that makes sense. That's the main part of that. There's a couple things I wanted to talk about here. Just make sure you use the launch instance when you're going through AWS, because that is what you have to do in order to be able to get those advanced options. That script that I copied and pasted in there. The IAM role is very important. So what I showed in the demo, I actually created an IAM profile that had these two permissions. That's definitely the simplest way to do it, to be able to get those permissions. And that's the session manager, so you can actually connect into the console to make any changes you want. And then again, in Azure, you'll have to use the serial console to get in there, and the root password is listed there. That's the default one. And like I say, SSH is disabled by default, so you're not able to SSH into these appliances. That's why you have to use Session Manager and serial console. And then the last thing here is just make sure you update that HTTP South configuration file. That's what's needed to get the open source Telegraph agents to work. And I think that's all I have. Hand it over to you, Yogita.
Yep, we have a few new features under our VMware Cloud. I'll be covering the first one. So the very first one is we have a new VCF management pack. So the very cool thing about this management pack is you can configure one or more VCF adapters. It's very easy to configure it. All you have to do is give your SDDC manager credentials, and it auto discovers the domains in your SDDC manager. Not only does it discover the domains, it also discovers underlying adapters for your vCenter, vSun, and vSix, along with the credentials that have been configured. Of course, you do have the option to change these credentials if this is not what you want and you would rather use a service account here. We also have a new VCF traversal spec, summary pages and config maxims that go with the objects in your object browser in vRealize Operations. So how do you do this? If you take a look at this, once you configure your VCF management pack, you can see details about it. You can stop or edit different adapters underneath that it found under it. You can also go in and check the individual adapters. So for example, if you're only interested in the vCenter one, or only interested in the NSXT one, you can go and do that as well. It auto discovers all the domains in your SDDC manager. So if you had 7 different domains in there, and out of them, you had 2 of them that were management 2 workload and the others were test, and you do not want to monitor your test domains, you can choose to do that selectively as well with this new management pack. This new management pack also comes with a new traversal spec and summary pages, which shows you the details of your VCF instance as to how many domains you have, what versions of vCenter, what versions of NSX you have in there, your configuration maximums for what is configured in your SDDC manager. Currently, all this is available right within the summary page in Object Browser. This management pack also comes with 12 out-of-the-box dashboards. Now, these dashboards are not new. These are those that came with the older SDDC management pack, but they are new and improved and bundled up now with your VCF management pack right here. So let's take a look at what it looks like in the product. Okay. So under data sources integrations, we now have a VMware Cloud Foundation management pack. And if you look at the details, I have already configured this, but if you were doing it brand new, all you have to do is give your SDDC manager credentials here, select the correct cloud proxy for your VCF instance and click save. And you will see a spinner here that auto discovers the domains underneath your SDDC manager. And in my case, I have 2 domains here. For each of the domains, it has also discovered the underlying adapters that are being used for those domains. It shows you how many are configured, and you can, if you say save this domain, it will start collecting information for that domain. So if I had a test domain here for which I do not want to collect information for, I can choose to not have that in there. Once you say save this domain, that's when it saves the information and everything underneath that domain, and it starts collecting information for it. Why am I getting multiple certificate requests? It's for the different adapters that are for the different hosts that are in my workload domain. Okay. Once I accept all the certificates, we'll start collecting information for it. Okay, I click save. Okay. If you expand this, you can see everything that it found for your VCF instance. If you were like me and you already had your vCenter in your VCF instance configured under the vCenter adapter, this management pack does a great job of pulling that vCenter into the correct domain under which it is configured. So you will not have your vCenter configured twice because you already had your vCenter adapter configured and now you configured your VCF instance to go with it. So that's very cool that it doesn't do any duplication. It also shows you the collector that is being used for your VCF management adapter instance. So if I choose to go with this and under object browser, I have a new VCF environment here. It is able to find your hosts and clusters. You now have a VCF world object. You can see the information regarding your VCF world as to what are the number of domains in there, how many ESXi hosts, how many virtual machines, all the details that you would normally get, like the vCenter world, you would now have a VCF world. You can, of course, drill down on this object tree here and go to whatever level is of interest to you. If you go to the SDDC manager, you can even see the configuration maximums that are for this particular version. It also shows you the VCF version that is installed in your lab and how many data stores, how many virtual machines are running on it. You can go to individual domains as well and even select your vCenter object, which is your standard vCenter. So it's the same as if you would have configured it with your vCenter adapter. Okay. I guess that's all I had to show for this VCF Cloud account.
One last thing to show here is for our support for VMware Cloud on Dell EMC. So just like Yogita was showing the VCF support, now we actually have support native for VMware Cloud on Dell EMC as well. So it's very similar if you've used the VMC on AWS. You basically select your Dell EMC account, add in your CSP token, configure, and that gives you the ability to configure your credentials for your vCenters. Some of the stuff that it gets you is inventory trees. So this is your ability to see your VMC on Dell from a host and clusters perspective, networking perspective, and storage perspective. So again, very similar to what you see on VMC on AWS. And then we do have a couple custom summary pages. So you'll see a custom summary page on the organization and the SDDC. We have the ability to show cost for your VMC on Dell environment. So this is actually based on rate card costing. So it's not based on the bill currently, but it is based on the rate card. So you can modify the rate card in the cloud providers tab of your cost settings page. So if you have discounts or whatever, you can go and modify the rate card to improve the costs that are showing. But the point here is you get the ability to see the cost of your VMC on Dell environment. You get potential savings, realized savings. You get your reclamation, all that stuff that's based on cost. All that stuff works, but just remember it's based on a rate card instead of the bill. We also have the ability to monitor configuration maximums for your Dell EMC environment. So in here, this is looking at the maximum number of clusters in your SDDC, things like that. So this is looking at all the published configuration maximums, and there are some maximums that are not available through APIs. So we actually have a configuration file that you can go and modify to change the threshold. So if you've worked with an SRE to get any of the limits changed, you can modify the configuration file to get to enter the new limit for your particular SDDC. So and that's under the configurations, the solution configuration section. So definitely check there if you need to modify those. Compliance, we also have the ability to monitor compliance in VMC on Dell environment. So there's a separate tab for VMC on Dell EMC, and you'll see, vSphere security configuration guide, vSAN, and then you'll see like the industry regulatory benchmarks like HIPAA, PCI, CIS, VSA, et cetera. So all those do work. Just one thing to note is, this is only looking at the virtual machines, since the host compliance is handled by, on the provider side, it's not something that's customer facing. So the compliance that you can monitor and you can see is only for the virtual machine level. We also have the ability to do what if planning for migration. So you can do this what if analysis. If I were to migrate to a new VMC on Dell EMC cluster, what would it? How many hosts would I need? What would it look like? So just if you've used the what if scenarios before, we just now have the VMC on Dell as another target cloud that you can select. And again, like I was saying before with the cost section, if you need to adjust the costs that are shown in the what if planning, you can modify those in the rate card as well. So it does double duty on the cost piece and the migration planning. Okay, and I think that's the end. I'm going to hand it over to Nico to cover Log Insight.
Thanks everyone for joining me for my bit. We're going to cover a very big feature that we've released in the newest version of Log Insight Cloud. We have now the ability to collect logs from ESX and NSX hosts, at least the auditing and the application logs from ESX hosts on AVS. So we call this the VMware vRealize Log Insight Cloud for Azure VMware Solution. I'm Nico Guerra, and I'll be going through this demo, but we'll these slides and this demo with everyone. So quick agenda today is we'll talk about the use cases for this new feature, the architectural overview, what types of logs you get from AVS. I'll give you a quick demo of the integration between AVS and Log Insight Cloud, and then we'll talk about pricing and packaging a little bit. So if you're already familiar with Log Insight Cloud for VMC on AWS, this is similar, though it's for our AVS Azure environment. So now, we can monitor all of our log sources. So if we already have a public cloud with AVS or Azure running, Log Insight Cloud becomes our one-stop shop for the logs that come from AVS, that come from Azure, or that come from any other location, whether that's another public cloud or whether that's on-prem. So we can analyze all of our logs in one place. We support a broad range of applications, so not just our standard public cloud or on-prem host logging. We can do Apache, Cisco F5. So once again, harping on that single pane of glass theme, we can pull all of our logs into Log Insight Cloud. So if you're running some kind of web or database environment on AVS or in Azure, just pull it all into Log Insight Cloud, and then you can do your analysis there and your root cause analysis and your troubleshooting. So we accelerate out-of-the-box troubleshooting with out-of-the-box dashboards, queries, and we have out-of-the-box dashboards for a lot of Azure solutions right now, and we're going to have AVS dashboards for the AVS solution in the very near future. But we give you a lot of good out-of-the-box dashboards and tools so you can get hit the ground running and not have to build your own content. So a lot of the logs and events that come out of AVS are your auditing, authentication, and NSX firewall logs. So this makes for a very important puzzle piece for your auditing teams and security teams. So we give you the power to pull those logs in, and then give you that out-of-the-box AVS content to manipulate that data and to make it useful for the teams that might need those AVS logs, whether that's security teams that need to see if applications are going through the firewall, if certain applications are being blocked or being allowed, any kind of bad actors that are trying to get in the environment. We integrate all that with Log Insight Cloud for the AVS environment, and you can do the analysis. You can bring your own logs. You can analyze the NSX firewall rules and the auditing and auth rules. You can take our out-of-the-box content and you can create your own content from that. depending on what your security and your operations team wants, security and operations teams want to see. And you can use that for the analysis for your AVS environment. So just some standard log inside cloud value proposition, collect from anywhere, whether it's syslog or HTTP. You get high performance analysis based on our architecture of log inside cloud. So, as you start pulling in all these logs from different public clouds, from AVS, from VNC and AWS, we make sure that a lot of that information, or we make sure that log inside cloud is highly scalable to be able to ingest all those messages. And then, of course, we give you unified visibility across public clouds. So your cloud admin, your VI admin, your DevOps admin can all use the same tool for public and private clouds and get the information they need, do the analysis they need to do, whether that's security analysis or operational analysis, all from one single place with public and private clouds. And just a simple architecture chart on how Azure VMware solutions work. So same as VMware Cloud and AWS, we configure a blob source or an event hub in Azure. We send our AVS, ESX, and NSX logs to that object, whether it's an event a blob storage or an event hub, and then we can just use some of the already built functions in Log Inside Cloud that will deploy to your Azure instance, configure the forwarding, and once the forwarding is configured, we will pull logs from that storage, from that event hub or from that storage blob, and we will push them to Log Inside Cloud using those Azure functions. Once those Azure functions are set up, and once you have Azure VMware Solutions pushing your data into Log Inside Cloud, we have a bunch of other content packs that you can install to make use of those logs and those events. And I'll show you that in the demo later on. But suffice to say that it's kind of all done via Azure functions and Azure functions that are provided to you in Log Inside Cloud under the content section, under the Add New Sources section that I'll show you. And once you configure those functions and those event hubs, you'll have your logs flowing from AVS to Log Inside Cloud. So, we don't collect every single log that comes from the host environment. Same as with VMC and AWS, we collect auditing events, authentication events, and NSX firewall events. So we could use that to increase your security, to monitor your AVS deployment, demonstrate compliance, make sure that people who are, user accounts that are logging in are the proper ones, user accounts that are failing are supposed to be failing, firewall rules that are allowing traffic in are proper, and firewall rules that are denying traffic are also the proper rules. And then, we identify traffic patterns, and then we maintain security by identifying those traffic patterns within NSX and making sure that your policies are configured correctly. So some of the logging we capture from AVS. So we collect your ESX audit events, your vCenter audit events, and your NSX audit events. So anyone who is logging into an ESX host, whether that's root or whether that's a user, your vCenter audit events, who's coming into vCenter based on their username and who's doing certain activities like vMotions or configuring HA or stuff like that, you're going to want to know. So the vCenter auditing gives you that information once it's pushed from AVS to Log Inside Cloud. And then your NSX audit events, so who's coming into NSX Manager as root or another user and making changes. And then we also give you your firewall and packet logs. So you can see the audit log examples on the right. Anything that a user might do, creating virtual machines, modifying virtual machines, modifying your firewall rules, modifying your firewall and NAT rules, IPsec. Big one is obviously failed logins. You want to make sure you have the proper information if outside or inside sources are failing logins to your remote Cloud vCenter, and then who's changing the logical networks, whether they're created or deleted. And I have a little bit more of a detailed page here. So for the AVS solution, we push any logs that contain the event provider Azure AVS. So we make sure these Azure AVS, we give this tag to make sure you understand that these logs are your AVS logs separate from your standard Azure logs that you might be pulling into Log Insight Cloud. So anything with this label AVS, you'll know that it's from your Azure VMware solution, from your vCenter, NSX, or ESX host. Your firewall source events. So right here, VMware Cloud VMC Audit NSX firewall exists and the source exists. So any kind of firewall action that is being logged and exists is being pushed to Log Insight Cloud. Firewall destination events, same thing, source and destination. Application ports permitted. So if you're permitting ports, people are opening and closing ports, we log that. Same thing with ports denied. And then any severity events that come from AVS. So if we have, high critical or alert severity events, we can get those so we can understand if there's a critical issue that we need to troubleshoot and look into in our AVS environment. Then I think our next thing is the demo. Yep. So let's go on a quick demo of what I'm talking about here. So you can see here in my Azure portal, I have an AVS private cloud here called prod AVS01 PC. This is our AVS private cloud. So to configure our Log Insight log retention for AVS, we just have to go to our log sources here. And in this version that we just released of Log Insight Cloud, we have this new tile for log sources called Azure VMware Solutions. So if you click on that, it's not like VMC on AWS that is automatically configured in the background. We do have to do manual configuration for this, but we do give you all of the steps. So I'll just scroll through these quick to show you kind of what we're doing, and then I'll show you in the actual demo. We're basically adding a diagnostic setting in AVS to push logs to VMware syslogs to our blob storage or event hub, and then we can use our other configuration, which we have here. So we have Azure configuration for event hubs or for blob storage. So this information will show you how to pull information from that AVS event hub we created and deploy the Azure functions to push the information that's in that event hub to Log Insight Cloud. So if we go here and we click on our AVS private cloud, we check our diagnostic settings. I already have a diagnostic setting here called vCenter logs. It's going to an event hub that my Log Insight Cloud function created for me called VMware log namespace. So if I edit this, you can see here that this object called AVS01 PC, which is our AVS instance, has a category that no other object would have in Azure called VMware vCenter syslog. So if you check this, you tell it to stream to an event hub. We might already have an event hub created for other logs, or we might have our Azure function in Log Insight Cloud create that event hub. So all we have to do is say, collect the VMware, collect these logs, send it to VMware logs namespace, and then use a few other configuration items that Log Insight Cloud will show you. And then once you save this and do your configuration, we will start pulling logs in from AVS. So once you do the configuration and you go to our log sources here, we have this tag that's plotted onto all of our logs coming from AVS called Azure AVS. So basically, once you configure the AVS log forwarding correctly to Log Insight Cloud, you'll see our events, and they'll all have this Azure AVS event title on them. So then if we go to our Explore logs, and then we just search for Azure AVS, right, well, I have a dashboard anyway that will show us all this information. So I created a quick dashboard that'll just pull up the events for us for Azure AVS. So I have a dashboard here called AVS logs. Yep, so all this is doing is looking for the AVS events, AVS error events, and AVS root logins. We do have the AVS dashboards coming up pretty soon. I think they're on the way to be released this week or next week. So right now there are no out-of-the-box dashboards or AVS, so I just created a few, but they are coming very soon. So if we view this log query, so yeah, log type contains Azure log, category contains VMware syslog, and you can see here that these are basically just your standard ESX logs that are being pulled in from Azure. And then you can kind of see that, we have errors set, like it's a lot of ESX stuff. So you kind of want to clean it up to see what's important to you. So we can do this for the, last 5 minutes, or we can do it for, let's do it for the last hour. And, if you're looking for somebody who's doing vMotions, if you're looking for errors with your HTTP proxy, people who are logging in, it's kind of, if you're already familiar with ESX logs, it's the same kind of logging. It needs to be cleaned up a bit. It's being broken up a bit strange, but yeah, it's something like this is a standard ESX log. So you can see here, the event provider is Azure AVS, it's VMware syslog, where it's coming from, the log source and the facility, and then our HTTP proxy resolve endpoint having an error. So same thing with your NSX logs. If you're looking for your application ports that are open or closed, or anything that's hitting the firewall log, you just have to do a search for your AVS event provider and look for your NSX logs, and you have them there, same as with VMC and AWS, or same as an on-prem solution if you are forwarding from there to LogInsight Cloud. So that is our demo of VMC and AWS. So as far as our LogInsight Cloud for AVS tiers, so you can either request a 30-day trial if your customer wants to try out AVS. If they have an AVS environment, they want to try out LogInsight Cloud, they can request a 30-day trial. They get 15 gigs per day, 30 days of queryable retention. Or, if they want to purchase LogInsight Cloud as a standalone, obviously it's priced per gig per month, they can forward all of their AVS logs to LogInsight Cloud using that. The freemium tier is not supported with AVS audit logs and NSX logs at this time. So once their 30-day trial period is over, they'll have to decide if they want to go to the standalone or if they just want to, stop collecting logs. But it will switch to the freemium tier, at which point, just through the agreement we have with Microsoft, it is not ready to be, the freemium tier is not ready to be used for AVS logs. That might change in the future, but for now, it's either 30-day trial or standalone. And the locations that we have right now for our VMware Cloud Management Services for LogInsight Cloud, Asia Pacific, Canada, Europe, US West, and Brazil. So those are the locations for that SaaS service that we have globally. And that's where the events from AVS would be going to any of those LogInsight Cloud instances running on our AWS cloud. So key takeaways, we made it pretty simple to deploy your Azure VMware solution for LogInsight Cloud. No proxies, no firewall rules needed. You just have to set up those Azure Event Hubs and that forwarding using our instructions, which I've gone through a ton of times already. And it's, if Azure, it should be pretty simple to set up, and it takes no more than 15, 20 minutes. And so adding on-prem logs is the same way. You can get our logs going from any locations by deploying a cloud proxy in your on-prem data centers, or using LogInsight on-prem to forward your logs to LogInsight Cloud. And then you get your single pane of glass for your public and private cloud solutions. And then we have Azure VMware Solutions. The specific use cases are for audit compliance, troubleshooting, some root cause analysis, and some visibility across clouds. The main use case for AVS solutions logging is for auditing and compliance, since they are obviously, after all, audit logs, authentication logs, and NSX firewall logs. But we also do give you enough logs to do, error level troubleshooting. There's an issue, some root cause analysis, and then you get your visibility. But obviously, since it is a public cloud product, it's not as transparent as your own private cloud information that comes from your servers, but we do give you enough to do the auditing that you might need to do. And then where to go next if you have more questions. We have a full LogInsight Cloud overview on our Cloud Management BU Tech Marketing channel, so check that out. We have some hands-on labs to go over how to use Azure with LogInsight Cloud. And then I've built a few labs for VMware Explore for Azure to create things like event hubs and to forward that information that comes in those logs through an Azure function to LogInsight Cloud. So if anyone's going to VMware Explorer, check that lab out. It'll give you the full top to bottom configuration, how to forward logs from Azure to LogInsight Cloud. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Nico, and thanks everyone for joining. I hope everyone found that useful, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.